What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. I haven't been doing a lot of videos lately, but the daily videos are coming back this week. I will be doing videos at least Monday through Friday, every single day, probably from now until next college football season. At least that's the plan. And sometimes we'll have videos on the weekends as well. But before we really get into breaking down these teams for the upcoming 2024 season, I do this every year. I like to look back at how teams were in one possession games to see which teams maybe were overrated, maybe underrated, better than their record, worse than their record. And that can kind of give you an idea of what to expect going into the next season, if these teams might be better or worse. It doesn't tell the whole story, obviously, but it's something that's always fun to look at. So we'll start here with the SEC, and we will start with, let's first look back at 2022. So what could this tell us about 2024? Well, you look for teams that had two or more wins versus losses, or vice versa, and you see Tennessee 3-0, South Carolina 2-0, Missouri 2-4. What does that tell us? Well, Tennessee, South Carolina, you'd expect them to maybe have a little bit of a worse record the next year. Well, both of those teams did indeed have a worse record. Missouri, maybe underrated, expect them to have a better record. What did they do? They had a better record. So I'm telling you, this doesn't always work out this way, but it usually does. Usually the law of averages kind of work out. You don't have a team that's just going to be great in one-score games all the time. If you're really good one year, you're probably going to be really bad the next year. It's just how it works. I'm telling you. So you look at the SEC East again, and it played out to be true. Tennessee and South Carolina both dropped off. Record-wise, Missouri went up. Everyone else really didn't have a big gap there in the wins and losses. So let's look at now what this could tell us for 2024. Starting with the records here, these were the records from 2023, of course, Georgia, and we're just looking at the regular season here, so it's an even playing field for all the teams. Georgia was 12-0, Missouri 10-2, Tennessee 8-4, Kentucky 7-5, South Carolina 5-7, Florida 5-7, and Vanderbilt 2-10. So how were these teams in one-score games? Well, Georgia was 2-0, Missouri was 4-0, Tennessee was 2-0. So once again, Tennessee was good in the one-score games. That means all their losses, all four losses, were actually blowouts, or at least multiple possession losses. Kentucky was 1-2, South Carolina 2-1, Florida 1-2, and Vanderbilt 1-1. So this tells us that potentially Georgia, Missouri, and Tennessee could have worse records this upcoming season. And with Georgia's schedule, I think it's going to be tough for them to go 12-0. Can Missouri repeat and go 10-2? I don't know about that. I do disagree with Tennessee, though. I think Tennessee has a better chance to actually increase their record, make their record even better this year. At least an early thought there. But again, we're a long ways away from the season. We're going to be breaking down the teams, looking at returning production, looking at the schedules and all that. So that's kind of the story here. Those three teams would be the teams that had kind of a differential there in the one-score games. If they had won all the one-score games, so I like to do this just to kind of look back at the season and say, what could have been? What could have been the best case and worst case scenarios? Georgia still would have been 12-0, Missouri still 10-2, Tennessee 8-4. Again, all of these teams at the top of the SEC East were undefeated in one-score games. The Kentucky could have been 9-3. South Carolina could have made a bowl game, could have been 6-6 if they had won that one possession game that they lost. Florida 7-5. Vanderbilt could have been 3-9. But on the flip side, Georgia could have been 10-2. This is not an exact science. The Georgia Tech game really wasn't all that close, but I think they did only wind up winning by 8. Missouri could have been 6-6. Could have been a much different story. You're talking about a huge swing there for Missouri. And again, they were only 2-4 last year. They improved that to 4-0. They had a much better year. Can they do it again, or will they drop off this year? That'll be the question. And again, there are so many variables. The teams are different. The schedules are different, but this is just something to look at. Tennessee could have been 6-6. Kentucky could have been 6-6. South Carolina 3-9. Wow, could have been even worse. Florida could have been 4-8, and Vanderbilt could have been 1-11. So if you split the one-score games, this is kind of what the teams, you could say this is what their record really should have been. Georgia should have been 11-1. Missouri actually should have only been 8-4. But I tell you what, at the end of the season, this looked like a 10-2 team. Tennessee actually should have been 7-5. Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, not much difference there, and Vanderbilt still would have been 2-10. So we'll see again if Missouri, that's the story. That's the team to watch here. Missouri, will they have a big drop-off next year if maybe those one-score games don't go their way? Now let's go to the SEC West, and again, we're going to look back at 2022. You see Mississippi State 2-0 in one-score games. That means you can expect a drop-off. That's exactly what we got. Now, Arkansas is the weird one here. Arkansas was 1-4, and so you'd have expected them to have a better year. That didn't happen. They were actually worse. So again, this doesn't always prove to be true. But for Texas A&M 2-5, they were expected to increase their record, and they did. So Arkansas, out of all these teams in the SEC, Arkansas is really the only team that this did not prove to be true, where teams were going to kind of reverse their fortune in one-score games. So let's look at 2023 now. Alabama, of course, 11-1. Ole Miss 10-2. LSU 9-3. Texas A&M 7-5. Auburn 6-6. Mississippi State 5-7, and Arkansas 4-8. How about in one-score games? Alabama was 3-0. Ole Miss was 4-0. So just like in the SEC East, teams that were at the top of their division, they were able to win close games. And I'm telling you, it can so easily go a different way. Look at Alabama back in 2022. Remember the close losses to Tennessee and LSU? They really could have won both of those games and wound up being undefeated. Of course, the flip side is they won some close games as well. But you know, it's usually just a play or two away from a season's team or a team's season looking totally different. And there's Ole Miss, just like Missouri, 4-0 in one-score games. So do we expect a big drop-off from them? Well, I don't, just because of the way they've reloaded their roster. But the odds would tell us that they're not going to go 4-0 in one-score games next year. Maybe they don't have that many one-score games. Maybe they are able to win some games more convincingly. We'll see. LSU is 1-1. Texas A&M 0-2. So once again, they struggled in the one-score games. Will the trend continue there for A&M? Will they be even better, have a better record this next year? Of course, again, there are so many variables, new coach and all that. Auburn is 1-3. Could have been a much different season for them if they had won their close games. Mississippi State was 2-1, and Arkansas 1-5. So Arkansas, the last 2 years, has just been awful in one-score games. Very similar to Nebraska, if you remember a couple of years ago. I don't remember. They were like, I can't remember the number, like 2-8 or something. It was like really, really bad in one-score games. They had a ton of them as well. And that's been the story for Arkansas. They've had a lot of close games the last 2 years, and they just have not been able to win them. So you look back at the best-case scenario, what could have been Alabama, they still would have been 11-1. Ole Miss still would have been 10-2. LSU could have been 10-2 if they had beaten Ole Miss in that close game that they had. A&M could have been 9-3, could have been a pretty good year, and even Auburn could have been 9-3. Now they, again, were very close to being 9-3, and then if they don't lay an egg against New Mexico State, win their one-score games, I mean, Auburn was not that far away from being 10-2, even though they didn't look like a 10-2 team, that's for sure. Mississippi State could have been 6-6, could have been a little better, could have made it to a bowl game. And then you look at Arkansas, 9-3. Look at that. If they won their close games, Arkansas could have gone all the way from 4-8 to 9-3. Could have been a much, much different season for the Razorbacks. If they lost all the close games, Alabama, it would have been 8-4. Yeah, you look at Auburn, you look at Arkansas as a one-score game. Texas A&M, they could have lost those games. It could have been a really bad year for the Crimson Tide. Ole Miss could have been 6-6, barely making it to a bowl game. LSU could have been 8-4. Texas A&M still would have been 7-5. Auburn could have been 5-7. Mississippi State and Arkansas could have been 3-9. And again, with Arkansas, it wouldn't have been much worse because they just could not win any close games. So if you split the one-score games, that again, you could say the true record for these teams: Alabama at 9.5 and 2.5. You look at Ole Miss just 8-4. LSU at 9-3. So that kind of tells me maybe LSU is actually better than Ole Miss record-wise. But again, Ole Miss beat them on the field. Texas A&M 8-4. Auburn 7-5, Mississippi State 4.5 and 7-5, and Arkansas actually would have made it to a bowl game if they just would have split their one-score game. So again, I'm not saying this definitely means anything. Don't overreact to this. It's just something we like to look at to see which teams could be trending in a different direction if kind of just fortune goes against them this next year where it went for them this year. And clearly, it's Ole Miss and Missouri. Those are the two teams that won a lot of close games. Can they keep that up? I think one of them probably will. I feel better about Ole Miss than Missouri. Maybe Missouri doesn't, maybe Ole Miss doesn't, but I have a hard time thinking that both of those teams are going to be able to win that many close games again and not lose any. I mean, the odds, again, would just tell us that that's not going to happen. Alabama and Georgia, maybe they have a bit of a drop-off. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Again, we revisit this at the end of every season, so we'll see if it proved to be true if we see a record drop for both Missouri and Ole Miss, and Alabama and Georgia potentially as well this next season. Your thoughts on this? Let me know what you think, and which teams do you think this is going to prove true for? Let me know, again, down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll do the Big Ten tomorrow, so stay tuned for that.